One thing I did notice, though, as we get ready for Ohio State, Texas, the rematch of uniforms at least, a lot of the faces are going to be different. The guy who scored the touchdown for Ohio State, a lot of the guys that were running down the field with him, the other guy that was pursuing the quarterback. None of them will be playing on Saturday. Look, Caleb Downs is back. Arch Manning's going to have his hands full for sure, but there's some unknowns on the other side that Arch will be facing when he comes into that game.
Yeah, well, look, Ohio State is going to reload. They're going to have still a really solid front seven. I think the secondary also should be solid. But I think the key for Texas, if you look at the offense, Rece, is more, can you run the football this year? Last year you had Q Wisner come in and end up being the starter. He rushed for 1,000 yards, which is a big deal for them because it adds the balance. And then also if you look at the way the defense is going to try to play against Arch and this offense is you can't have 7 or 8 man boxes because now Arch can just drop back and drop bombs all day, or you play with 6 man boxes, then they're going to run the football. And let's not forget, Arch can run the football too. He's not like Peyton or Eli. This guy actually is really, really athletic, and he could take off a run as well. So it's really pick your poison when you look at this offense.
The thing about the Texas run game that they were missing, as good as it was at times, was that downhill physical back that Steve Sarkisian loves. Trey Wisner was great. Jarrett Gibson was a freshman. But C.J. Baxter coming back, There was a lot of excitement around him last year. Talking to their running backs coach a year ago, Tashard Joyce, he thought that there were some Edgerrin James type comparisons for C.J. Baxter. If he's fully healthy off that ACL, it gives him a physical downhill runner behind an offensive line that's retooled, but it's a different vibe than they had a year ago where Trey Wisner was a little bit more of a scat back than that downhill between the tackles guy.
What about the Ohio State defense? They're replacing their pass rushers. A lot of it will be built around Caleb Downs, but they have a lot of unproven commodities. But look, it's Ohio State. They've got big-time stars coming back, but they certainly have a lot to live up to. They've got a new coordinator, too, Matt Patricia's in there with Jim Knowles having gone to Penn State.
The Matt Patricia coming over from the NFL, that's going to be interesting. How much of the structure does he keep from a year ago? But impact players at the second and third levels. Caleb Downs maybe the best player in college football. Sonny Styles, one of the best linebackers in college football. The defensive line is going to be talented. There's questions on who the individuals are going to be that steps up. But like you said, Rece, it's Ohio State. So you kind of just chalk up to the fact that they're going to be so talented that the playmakers and the impact players on the back end are going to be able to make plays.
So I'm looking at Kenyatta Jackson, who was on this team last year. He should be a big rush in, but they also went to the portal and brought in Bo Atkinson from North Carolina. Yeah. This is a big guy, about 6'6", 270 pounds coming off the edge, so that should sturdy it up. But the other part, too, if we look at the run that Ohio State had in the college ball playoff, I want to say it was 16 sacks throughout those 4 games to get to a championship. I still believe defense wins championships. That's what we preach when we're in Little League. It's the same thing here at the college football level. So for them, you got to own the line of scrimmage. And again, like we said with Texas, can you stop the run that Texas is going to put on you there in week 1?
Texas has some new guys on defense, too, and they also have some returning pass rushers, most notably Colin Simmons, who apparently was quite aware of the fact that Ohio State made a quarterback decision with Julian saying. Julian had, the scarlet background looking, and he posted it on Instagram just to make sure he recognized him when he was ready to go.
Yeah, but I'll say this to Colin, though. Hey, be careful what you ask for now, because this kid can play, and I like Julian saying, and, you look at the quick trigger. I go back and watch the spring game a few days ago. He was decisive. He knew where to go with the football. And, guys, he has the best receiver in the country, Jeremiah Smith. Julian, don't make this thing too hard now. Feed that guy. If all else fails, Jeremiah Smith somewhere down there, give him an opportunity to make a play.
Let's not forget, he was Coach Saban's pick to be his next quarterback at Alabama. The only reason he ended up at Ohio State was because Coach Saban decided to come join us on the TV side. The thing is, though, if there's anybody who's earned the benefit of the doubt that they're going to have great quarterback play, it's got to be Ohio State. I mean, you look at the starters that they've had in recent memory. Will Howard, all he did was win a national championship. Kyle McCord, I think that tenure, wasn't the highest looked upon, but Kyle McCord was very solid. C.J. Stroud and Justin Fields, obviously first-round picks. They've had great quarterback play since Urban Meyer has taken over at Ohio State, and there's no reason to think that that's not going to continue, especially because none of those guys had Jeremiah Smith to throw the ball to.
And you said earlier Caleb Downs might be the best player in college football. That might be true. Unless it's Jeremiah Smith.
Right.
They might have the best offensive and best defensive player.
Jeremiah Smith was number 1 on the top 100 that our writers came up with, and Caleb Downs is number 3. So when you've got number 4, I mean, he's a difference maker. And as good as the run of receivers has been at Ohio State, this guy is the most physically talented of all of them. So, EJ, if you had a guy like that to throw to, I mean, you're going to him how many times a game?
I'm going to him a bunch, but the beauty of having Jeremiah Smith as well as you're going to see a lot of cloud coverage. We have safeties over the top. So now the attention can go to Brandon Ennis or it can go to Cardinal Tate, the other really good receivers at Ohio State.
Yeah.
So it's really feast or
super
famine.
highly touted guys.
Those guys are great too.
Productive.
They're going to be
really
first and second round picks as
yeah.
well. So again, you can't just put all your marbles on Jeremiah Smith and expect you got to stop him. You got other pieces. And Max Clare too, the tight end. They just got Max Clare as well. So
transfer is going to be really
great
good for them. But the big question is, look, this is a blockbuster game, number 1 against number 3. But will they end there? You wonder if either are even going to win their conference. Ohio State, even the favorite in the Big Ten right now, or would you lean Penn State? Or someone, either of them win the conference?
I like Penn State, but look, I like Oregon too.
Okay.
Look, Oregon comes in from the Pac-12, first year in the Big Ten, and all they did was win the conference. That's a big deal. 8-0 in regular season play within the conference, and they got Dante Moore as well. So I think at times we forget to get to Oregon because they're so far away, right? Again,
Sometimes
I'm an
you
East
can do
Coast
it
guy.
early, like
but
right now.
The thing about it, Dante Moore is one of those guys who got a chance to sit last year. That's a big deal. We always talk about Arch Manning, we talk about Garrett Nussmeier, these guys who sat for a year or two. He's done the same thing last year. He did start as a true freshman. He was at UCLA. I believe that's going to be a huge advantage to him. Now this is your team. You work with some of these younger guys who are now going to be starters at receiver when you want a scout team. And again, you got a great defense because your head coach is a defensive guy. So I like the things for Dante Moore for this season.
I like Ohio State, but it's mainly because I just don't trust Penn State yet. They haven't beaten Ohio State since 2016, which is the last time they won the Big Ten.
Here are some ACC impact games in week 1. It is a tremendous schedule. We've talked about a couple of these. Want to lock in on that primetime game on Saturday night. LSU and Clemson. Been a little off-season talk is which one's Death Valley, which one's Death Valley Jr. They will be in Clemson. Garrett Nussmeier, among the returning quarterbacks, one of the few teams that has a big-time returning quarterback. Some believe he could be a very high draft pick next year. He is a gunslinger and fun to watch. Klubnik was terrific. And this ought to be, I'm really looking forward to this game. And Clemson, new defensive coordinator in Tom Allen, but, you know, I think with the maturing receivers, a lot of those freshmen in their second year playing with Klubnik, could be an explosive offense for the Tigers again.
The big thing I love about Cade Klubnik is the growth that you've seen year over year, but also week to week. Even if you go back to last season when they started against Georgia, he didn't have a great game, but he came back the following week against App State and just tore him up. And I think part of it, too, guys, is the confidence that has grown with his receivers. Antonio Williams is coming back, Brian Wesco, DJ Moore. Like, he has some guys who can make plays for him, but also his time clock has improved so much where he knows, hey, I'm getting late in the down, let me take off and run. And then it ends up being a big run like that for a touchdown to win the game against Pitt, or let me just move around in the pocket and find a receiver open that also, you know, ends up being a big gain. So I love where Cade Klubnik is at right now. I think potentially he could be the #1 draft pick after this season and also a natural champion.
Well, a thing that'll help him, too, is the improvement on that offensive line was significant over the course of last season. They brought in Matt Luke, former Ole Miss head coach, to be the offensive line coach last year. And what Matt Luke, the way he taught that offensive line really helped accentuate a lot of what they did in Garrett Riley's offense, especially with their gap scheme runs. They got so much better with that it helped both Cade Klubnik in the run game and the run game in general. So, yes, Cade Klubnik's great and all the receivers are great, but that offensive line, which brings back the bulk of its experience from a year ago, I think should be one of the best in the ACC, if not the country.
You know, a defensive line for Clemson, too. They have a couple guys who are preseason All-Americans in Peter Woods, T.J. Parker. But, you know, Dabo said at one point in the offseason, he said, last time I saw them, they were chasing after some Texas guy running down the field for a touchdown. But Tom Allen's in there now. I actually think that's going to be kind of an old school return to old school Clemson up front.
I could not agree more, and they need it. I mean, this is a Clemson team that was 9th in the ACC in total defense a year ago, 16th in the ACC in rush defense. And Rece, I'm old enough to remember when the ACC didn't have 16 teams. The fact that Clemson ended up 16th in rush defense, that's why they needed to make a change on that side of the ball.
Rush defense is one thing, and rushing the passer will be a big deal because Garrett Nussmeier, man, I mean, Nuss can sling it, and he's got some weapons out there as well. They did work in the transfer portal to get some extra weapons for Nussmeier.
Yeah, they bring in Nick Anderson, and he's a big target, but also Nussmeier. Again, he was a first-year starter last year, so in the moments where it wasn't clean, I genuinely think it was just because of inexperience. Now you have a guy who's going to take the check down, a guy who knows when he can push the football down the field, but also having the experience from last year, the bad part that he can really expand on in this season. I'll add this, too. If he can cut the interceptions in half, that's a big key, not just for him as a potential first-round pick as a quarterback, but that's the key for LSU winning the first game. Like, if he goes out there in Death Valley at Clemson turning the ball over, it could be a long day, but I think he'll improve from that.
A couple of things. You saw the offensive line and all the guys that they got drafted last year, so they're going to have 4 new faces up front. Again, they've worked the portal there. Opening game. LSU has not won the first game of its season since Joe Burrow was the quarterback, and they won the national championship 2019. BK hasn't done it. They've sort of taken a different approach. They've put it all over the facility.
Yeah,
they put the Clemson version of the pause, different places to try to focus in because, well, the other way didn't work.
No.
You know, they've lost some close ones, a couple to Florida State. One got away from them at the end against Florida State, and then they lost a close one to USC in the opener in Vegas a year ago. They'll see if they can do better this time against Clemson. That's going to be a great game on Saturday night. We're going to get things started with Syracuse and Tennessee. Game that's going to be played in Atlanta. Syracuse had a great season under Fran Brown last year. Of course, Tennessee has been involved in a lot of the off-season controversy with Nico Iamaleava going to UCLA and what functioned as a de facto trade. Joey Aguilar coming back via UCLA. You're likely going to be the starting quarterback for the Volunteers. There's a lot of unknown in this game. We do know this: everybody's going to be in orange. Other than that, a lot of unknown here.
There is. On the Tennessee side, there's not only questions at quarterback, but there's questions around Joey Aguilar. The thing is, Joey Aguilar coming into this season, you mentioned interceptions with Garrett Nussmeier. Joey Aguilar led the nation in interceptions a year ago with 14 at App State. So he's going to have to cut down on that. This Tennessee defense is going to be good enough to keep them in most games, but they lose the SEC Player of the Year on offense in Dylan Sampson. They lose a lot on the offensive line. So it puts a lot on the shoulders of Joey Aguilar, who had great moments last year at App State, EJ, and has tools, but certainly turned the ball over too much.
Interesting part in this matchup, if you look at the quarterbacks, Steve Angeli and Joey Aguilar got to their new teams late. You know, they were more or less like either right at the beginning of spring or right at the end of spring. So how are they able to really take over these offenses and kind of take the ownership there? But I look at Steve Angeli at Syracuse, and I know we saw him in a short stint there at Notre Dame. Accurate passer, as a guy that was able to push the football down the field. But one thing I know about their head coach, Fran Brown, he's going to create some type of winner. So whatever style of offense they got to have, they'll find ways to be competitive.
Their schedule is much more difficult than it was a year ago, but Fran did a great job a year ago, and we'll find out where they stack up against Tennessee. And then between those two games, another ACC-SEC matchup. Alabama on the road at Florida State. Jalen Milroe is gone for the Crimson Tide. Florida State is trying to reboot the whole thing. Gus Malzahn is now the offensive coordinator there. Nice little nugget. Alabama defensive coordinator Kane Womack played for Gus when Gus was the OC at Arkansas, and he's known him since he was in junior high school when they were in neighboring towns in Arkansas. So what do you think about Alabama, Florida State?
Well, I think it all starts with the quarterback situations at both schools, but particularly at Florida State, because the quarterback at Florida State's been talking to Thomas Castellanos, and he's got an incredible skill set. I mean, when he tucks the ball and runs, he's one of the most dangerous runners in the country, and he's had great moments throwing the football. The thing is, he has to play better than he did a year ago. Amongst qualifying quarterbacks, was the worst quarterback in the ACC in terms of QBR. Now, the offense didn't fit. He obviously didn't get along with Bill O'Brien, but the play has to improve. He did commit to Gus Malzahn and spend a year at UCF with Gus Malzahn. So the reuniting of those two is going to be a big determining factor of whether or not Florida State's in this game.
Yeah, the big pause for Tommy Castellanos last year was the fit. He didn't fit what Bill O'Brien at Boston College wanted to do as an offense. That's why he's no longer there. Now you get Gus Malzahn, who you mentioned they've had previous connections. I believe this is a time where you're going to see the best of Tommy Castellanos. And then I'm looking at Alabama's quarterback situation. You know, that came out, I believe, a week ago with Ty Simpson, who's been in this team for a while. Maybe not the system, because Ryan Grubb is coming back to call the plays here, but this is a guy who's accurate. He's a big, quarterback, and I think for him too, to show that dual threat ability, you're not going to have Jam Miller in this week 1 matchup. Florida State, new defensive coordinator Tony White, they're going to try to muddy up the picture for this guy. So the big thing is find your receivers. Ryan Williams, one of the best players in the country. Everybody talking about Odie is, I guess he's 18 now, because everybody said 17 last year. But find him, and then also Jeremy Bernard, 2 really good guys with a great options. And you could throw a 5-yard pass like this, Rece, and it could take it another 20 yards. That takes the pressure off of the quarterback to feel like, you know what, I don't have to be perfect with everything. I can put it in a spot and allow those guys to go up there and make some of those big-time plays.
Very few quarterbacks on the planet run the way Jalen Milroe did.
Yeah.
But don't be – Ty Simpson can go. He can run too. Maybe – Like I said, nobody's Milroe, but
Right.
but Ty
that.
Simpson
Yeah.
is not a statue back there by any stretch. It'll be a great game on Saturday afternoon. On Sunday night, Notre Dame and Miami. Now Miami went portal, got the quarterback in Carson Beck. Notre Dame stuck with their highly touted recruit and went with C.J. Carr. Jimmy Johnson, Lou Holtz back in the day, Catholics versus convicts, they called it. And the great Lou Holtz said if they want to fight, we're not going to fight afterwards, but afterwards, if they want to meet in the parking lot, go ahead. But you saved Jimmy Johnson's backside for me.
Oh, yeah.
My money's always on Sweet Lou. Notre Dame and Miami, another top 10 matchup. Carson Beck, you're really high on how this is going to work out for Mario Cristobal and the Canes.
I'm high for Carson Beck because he's going to be in a system under Shannon Dawson as offensive coordinator that's going to truly give him the keys to the car. If you saw how Cam Ward was able to really inflect his personality in this offense, whether it was moving around in the backfield, whether it was checking at the line of scrimmage, whether it was even, keeping the play going 8-9 seconds into the down. Not to say Carson Beck has to do those things, but guys, this is still a player who a year ago we thought would be the #1 overall pick. So if he's able to put this thing together, of course stay healthy. I know he had the shoulder injury last year, and he has some really good receivers around him to work with. Josiah Trader is a player who should be really good, also a former teammate of Jeremiah Smith. So I think the sky's the limit right now with Carson Beck within this offense under Shannon Dawson.
Yeah, I mean, this is a guy that threw for 7,900 yards in the SEC. There's not a lot of Georgia quarterbacks that have thrown for 3,000 yards in back-to-back seasons, and he's done it. Been coached by NFL pedigree and Todd Monken and obviously Mike Bobo there as well. So the question to me is not so much about whether or not Carson Beck is going to be successful. I think he will be. That offensive line is great. EJ talked about the weapons. The question to me in Miami is on defense, and we won't have that answered until they square off against Notre Dame.
And then when Notre Dame takes the field, C.J. Carr will lead them out as the quarterback, the grandson of the legendary Lloyd Carr, former Michigan head coach. C.J. has waited his turn. He's been meticulous in his preparation, but he had a real quarterback battle with Kenny Minchie in the offseason. They battled for it, and it was tight for a while, but C.J. was able to separate by the slimmest of margins, and he'll get the first call there. Marcus Freeman's been pretty clear that, believes in both, but once the decision's made, they don't want the swapping back and forth. So if you're going to break in a new quarterback and let him maximize his talent, you might as well bring back an experienced offensive line. Now, there's a caveat there with Charles Jagusah, who has been sort of perplexed and bedeviled by injuries, was hurt in an off-season ATV accident, will be back at some point this season, but probably not ready for Miami. But it's a good place to start for the Irish to have all of those offensive linemen up front.
It's a very good place to start, and it's certainly a better place than they started last year when Charles Jagusah got hurt before the season, and he didn't have the starts. He was just a projected guy, but so much more experience coming into this season. And as long as C.J. Carr can turn around and do that,
Jeremiah Love.
with Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price and Aeneas Williams too, let's not forget about him. I think he'll be in pretty good shape because that run game and that running back room should be one of the best in the country.
And the other great part for C.J. Carr is his offensive coordinator, Mike Denbrock, will create the offense that makes him comfortable. Yeah. If you look at Denbrock the past couple of seasons, last year he was coaching Roddy Leonard. That got that offense to a championship. The year before that, he was coaching Jayden Daniels at LSU. So he can morph this thing however it needs to look to make sure the quarterback looks the best out there on the football field.
All right, Thamel is back with us now. Pete, what are you hearing out of South Bend?
Well, Rece, I think that the choice of C.J. Carr puts Notre Dame in a position where they're going to run a defiantly pro style. The quarterback run game, simply put, will not be part of Notre Dame's offense. And that means more Jeremiah Love if that's possible. Remember, last year he had 1,100 yards, averaged 7 yards a carry. And I had an NFL scout who went through there last week tell me he's on a trajectory to be a top 15 type pick. He has rare burst, but as you see in this run here against Penn State, he has rare toughness. Remember, he was on a bum ankle that game, and he just simply ran through the Penn State defense. Look for him to be a little more involved in the pass game, Rece. He caught 28 balls last year, but to get C.J. Carr comfortable, spinning the ball out to Jeremiah Love and letting him use that burst is a pretty good way to get him settled in.
You want this, you got that. No way, watch him walk right past you. Run fast,